Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Amore.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks a million for that. Appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Turned 56 a couple of weeks ago, and climbing up that stage wasn't as easy as it used to be. Yeah, it gets worse. So I want to make sure I have everything squared away here. Okay. Well, thank you. So as Andy said, my name's Anthony Amore. Andy, I want to apologize for overdressing tonight. So one part of my bio that Andy left out is that I have been at the Gardner for 17 years now. So I've been looking for these stolen paintings for quite some time. I never dreamt it would take that long. I'm an alum as well. I graduated from the Kennedy School in 2000 with my friend Jeff Katz. And it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you all for coming out tonight. And I want to talk to you a bit about art theft in general leading up to the Gardner Museum, and give you a little, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself just because it pertains to the story. It'll make sense to you. I worked the first 15 or so years of my life in Homeland Security jobs, mostly agencies that fell under Homeland Security, but I worked for them before it happened, if that makes any sense. So I was a law enforcement officer with immigration for a bunch of years, then I was a federal agent, and then I helped, after 9/11, I was asked to come on board and help rebuild security at Logan, which most people, if not all in this audience, know is the airport from which the two aircraft departed that struck the Twin Towers. And not to mention my fellow alum again, but Jeff was one of the first people that emailed me that day to see how things were. But after we rebuilt security at Logan Airport, I felt like I wanted a new challenge, but I wasn't specifically looking for a job. One Sunday afternoon, I was flipping through the Boston Globe, and I was looking at the job announcements. Do you remember when jobs used to be in the newspaper? Right? There would be jobs listed there, believe it or not. And I swear to you, I wasn't like job hunting, but I saw Security Director Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and the thing that struck me was that the advertisement was this little ad, and I thought, this is the place that this monstrous heist happened. And they're advertising with this tiny little ad in the back of the newspaper between like service counter at Pep Boys and secretary or something. So I have to apply, I have to meet these people. And I had never been to the Gardner Museum before, and I went, and the interviews were in the courtyard. And I bet almost everybody, has anybody here not been to the Gardner Museum? Single yourself out so I can snare at you. So, as a matter of fact, right now is the nasturtiums are up, so you should all come. So I'm sitting there and looking at this, and the week that I had my interview, my assignment had been, we had intel that terrorists might try to take down an aircraft departing or landing at a domestic airport using a shoulder-fired missile. So I had to identify spots around the airport that they might do something like this from. So that means garbage dumps and construction sites, right? So I take a break from that and go to the Gardner, and I'm sitting at the courtyard, and I said, you know what, maybe this would be a nice change. You know, maybe being able to get up from my desk and go look at the first Raphael in America might be a nice switch. So I went over to the Gardner, but I can say this now, 17 years later. When they asked me if I thought I could run an investigation looking for art thieves, I said, sure, but frankly, my whole career had been spent trying to stop terrorism, not looking for art thieves. So thankfully, I got the job, and I immediately started using Homeland Security techniques about art theft. So I was very ambitious, and I said, I'm going to look at every art theft, museum heist over the last 100 years, and I'm going to make a database and assemble all the data from these heists to figure out a profile of who would have done this. That's how I'm going to start. So I made this database, and it included, I still maintain it, and it includes everything from hour of day that the theft happened to where were the paintings recovered, was there violence involved, were there disguises, how many thieves were there, how far from the museum were the paintings recovered, who were the artists, etc., right? And in the first couple of days, I realized this was a bad approach, because the first lesson of art theft is that it's far too massive an illicit industry, if you will, for that sort of research. It's a multi-billion-dollar per year illicit industry, right? It's estimated to be second or third worldwide. You know, there's drugs, there's guns, there's money laundering, there's art theft. So it's a big problem. So I decided to focus in on Rembrandt because we had lost 3 Rembrandts on March 18, 1990. And I wanted to see how those were executed and what happened. So as I was compiling this data, I came up with a really good profile of these heists, and I said, these might make a good book someday. And I was right. They made Stealing Rembrandts, the book that you see here, coincidentally available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Thank you very much. So there's a big misconception about art theft, right? And most of you in this room, frankly, probably have it, that art theft is this really sexy sort of criminal enterprise, and the people that steal art do it for some rich billionaire somewhere in the world, and that they're really brilliant and they know a lot about art and they're debonair and they're like what's his name there, Thomas Crown. I just saw that movie a couple years ago. Has everybody seen Thomas Crown up here? So I watched it and I thought to myself, there is nothing in this movie that's accurate. Nothing, okay? So there's nothing to be learned from that. And you're looking at me right now and you know we don't look like Pierce Brosnan in the art world too, right? So but people really believe the Thomas Crown thing. They really believe that there's somebody who goes out and steals masterpieces for their own enjoyment, and they pick a piece that they alone like, and they take it home, and they get a brandy snifter, and they sit and they look at it and enjoy it. That's only in the movies, right? Another film that gives people a misconception about art theft is a film called Entrapment, and it was Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery. It's on cable if you want to see it. And this is another great example. So people see these films and think this must be how art theft happens. Because I know I'm speaking at the Harvard Club, but very few people have had multi-million-dollar masterpieces stolen from them. That might be a shock to Harvard graduates, but it's true, right? This movie depicts, this is a great scene, it's my favorite scene. It's Catherine Zeta-Jones blindfolded by Sean Connery, and she's doing these gymnastics to make her way through these red laser beams that depict motion sensors, right? That's what you envision. So in real life, motion sensors are not red laser beams like you see in the movies, right? Because we don't want to tell you step left, step back, step right, go under this one. Why would we want you to see that? They're invisible, okay? Number 2, I mentioned this database that I've maintained, and now I have about 1,400 heists in it with all the details from them. And after spending 17 years looking at 1,400 heists, I can tell you with great confidence that no thief has ever robbed a museum wearing a blindfold, right? Why I don't understand why a thief would wear a blindfold, but that's... So some of you, though, in the audience are old enough like me to remember a show called It Takes a Thief with Robert Wagner. Right? And he, again, is this really handsome guy, very smart, always wearing like the black turtleneck, pulling off these really clever crimes, cat burglar type. And I bring him up because, does anybody remember what his name was in that show? Awesome. Perfect. Alexander Mundy. This is a guy named Florian Mundy, okay? Now, when I researched art theft, there's a lot of things that jumped out to me. Number 1 is that Rembrandt is the most often stolen artist, right? When you look at his works, lack of a better term, per capita, his works are stolen the most. And the reason is because everybody has heard of Rembrandt. So if we go to, pick a high school, if we go to the freshman class and just simply say, have you heard of Rembrandt? Students are going to say yes, they have. They might not be able to pick out one of his paintings or talk about him, but they've heard of Rembrandt, right? If you go and you ask them if they've heard of Rothko, they're going to say no, even though his paintings are very, very valuable, but they're not going to know that name. That's one of the reasons Rembrandt is stolen so often. Everybody knows Rembrandt. Everyone knows his paintings are old. He's great, so therefore they must be valuable. They're in every great museum has a Rembrandt, right? Every big city has a great museum, hopefully. So Rembrandt is most often stolen, and that helped me along in my research. The other thing I learned, and those of you who are Massachusetts residents can sit up really proudly in your chairs to know that all of these great heists come back to Massachusetts, right? Everything bad happens here when it comes to crime. And the three most important art heists are what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, leading up to the Gardner. And they all happen here in the Commonwealth. So I know Governor Healy was here last night. I should bring that message to her too. But it's Massachusetts is a bad place for masterpieces. Okay. So in fact, when I was walking outside, I saw this painting of John Adams. It's after Copley on the staircase, which I love. I love John Adams. And I spoke here about 10 years ago to some group. I don't remember who it was. And I noticed the painting had a tear in it. And it's 10 years and it hasn't been fixed. So I'm going to talk to someone about that later. That needs to be fixed. So this guy, Al Munday, is out in what we in Boston would say the western part of the state, which is Worcester, in that area, right? And he goes by Florian, and he's a thief for a profession. That's what he does. He's better educated than most thieves. He graduated from Providence College, but he's living out in the Worcester area. And he knows a little bit more about art than most thieves, because art thieves, people who steal art, I should say, because there are no professional art thieves, but, we okay? So art thieves don't know art. They aren't experts in art. They just steal what they think is valuable. But Al knows a little bit about art, not a ton. For instance, his favorite artist is Renoir, right? Whose favorite artist would be Renoir? Come on, right? No offense to the Renoir fans, but he knows what he's looking at when he goes to a museum. So he's taking a course at Assumption College in Worcester, and he tells me that one night after class, he goes outside, and he's thinking to himself, when I steal things and I sell them on the black market, I'm getting about 10%, right? That is a pretty fair judgment. If you steal a car, this is back in the early 70s, so if he stole a car that was worth $2,500, he's going to get around $250 for it. And Al has visions of grandeur, like many people who steal art. He sees greater things for himself. He tried to be a rock and roll star. He had a band called Florian and the Mondos. He put out a record. So he gets this bright idea. You know, if I steal a painting from the Worcester Art Museum and I get 10% for it, now we're talking real money. So he starts plotting this theft. And what he does is goes to the Worcester Art Museum very regularly and looks at the paintings. And people say to me, why do paintings get stolen so often? And here's one of the reasons. When you go to a museum and you stand there in front of a painting for 5 minutes just staring at it, we're happy, right? If I had a bank, I wouldn't want you to look at the vault for 5 minutes. If I had a jewelry store, I wouldn't want you to be casing the place for 5 minutes. But in a museum, we welcome you to come in and take your time, right? So Al would do that regularly, but he wasn't looking at the art as much as he was looking at the security. How is the painting hanging on the wall? Where are the cameras, if any? Where are the guards? What do the guards look like? Are they armed? How do I get in and out of here quickly? And very importantly, what paintings would get me the most money? And that's the motive. People do not steal masterworks from museums because they have someone out there who's a collector of Degas. They steal what they think is the most valuable. So Al targets 4 paintings. Remember, I mentioned his favorite artist is Renoir. And there's Renoir paintings at the Worcester Art Museum, but he doesn't want them. He targets 2 paintings by Gauguin, a Picasso, and a Rembrandt, of course. Right? So he starts looking at these and making plans. This is Al. That's Al in his gym suit. He has to play the mobster all the time, so he posed for the Boston Globe in a gym suit. So Al plots out the theft, figures out how it should be done. Smart enough not to do it himself, he picks 2 of his flunkies to do it for him. 2 young guys around 20 years old are going to go in and rob these paintings. And Al plans for the heist to happen in broad daylight. Now everybody, because of movies, pictures people rappelling through the skylight, wearing balaclavas, hovering over those red laser beams, right? But a slight majority of art heists happen in the daytime at museums. And think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense, right? If you try to rob a museum at night, museum's like a fortress, so you have to find a way in. If you rob it in the day, the doors are open for you. You're halfway there. We want you to come in, we're welcoming you, we're begging you to come and look at our art. So that's why it happens a lot during the day. So Al has these 2 guys, he brings them in and he shows them the art he wants them to steal. They got it, these 4 paintings on the 2nd floor of the Worcester Art Museum. So on the day of the heist, they go to his house, he goes over the plan one last time. He gives both of the thieves blue windbreakers to wear. And he gives them these because He supposes that visitors to the museum who see someone taking a painting off the wall calmly, dressed similarly, will probably be left alone by the visitors, right? And that's a good bet, because I'm going to tell you now, if you've ever been in a museum where you saw them taking paintings off the wall, it was a theft. We don't move paintings when visitors are in the building, right? So that's his supposition, that they're going to look the other way. Visitors won't interfere if they see two guys dressed alike taking a painting. Then he gives them their directions one more time. He previously had told another member of his underlings he needs a getaway car, steal a car. And this is the car they steal, right? Now, those of you who are old enough to remember 1972, that's a subcompact station wagon in 1972, right? But he needs the station wagon because one of the Gauguins is called the Brooding Woman, and it's big. It would be very difficult to put into the back seat of a sedan. So he says, steal a station wagon, and this is the car that they steal. So the plan's ready. It's time for the guys to go. It's just before noon, and they're not leaving. And Al says, what's the holdup? And the thieves say, well, prospective thieves say, where's our gun? And Al's just flabbergasted by this. He said, what gun? There's never been a gun in this discussion. The guards at the museum are all elderly gentlemen, retirees. None of them have guns. You're two young, tough guys. There's no gun. And they argue over this. And finally, Al gives in because he wants the theft to happen. And he goes into his bedroom, like most of us have a stolen revolver in their nightstand, right? And he gets the gun, and he brings them the gun, and now they're happy. So they take it, and they leave to go out to the car. On the way down the walk, they open it up, and they look in the cylinder. There's no bullets, right? They go back inside. They argue with Al. And finally, he relents, and he gets one bullet. And I remember him telling me the story. He goes, I handed it out to him, and I pulled it back, and I said, don't put blood on my paintings. And he meant that figuratively. He understood that if you shoot someone in the commission of this crime, it's going to be a much, much bigger deal than if you just take these paintings. And we're professionals. We're not going to shoot anybody, of course not. But they're happy. They have their gun. They take the gun. They get in the car. They drive to the Worcester Art Museum. They pull outside the main entrance where there's a circular drive. They walk in. How many of you have been to the Worcester Art Museum? A lot of you? Wow, nobody, huh? Amazing. Good job, Jan. It's a good museum. It's a great museum. If it was in a cosmopolitan city, it would be regarded as a great museum, but it's in Worcester, so you don't even drive from Boston to go see it. This is Renaissance Court, and the two thieves enter the museum. Now, this is a modern photo, so the rails were not completely enclosing this mosaic. So the Worcester Art Museum has one of the world's great collections of, great collections of Antioch mosaics. And this is in the center, and they had rails up, but not like this, encapsulating it. Now, Al gave the thieves very specific instructions. So when you go in, just like in The Godfather, he says, don't look anybody in the eye, but don't look away either. Don't walk out, but don't run. In other words, just try to be nondescript. They get it. So they walk into the museum, two young guys, and they go up to those stairs to go to the second floor. At the time, next to those stairs, there was a bench. And when they walked in, there were two young high school seniors, two girls, particularly attractive. And as not to be recognizable to these girls, the thieves walk up to them and say, you two should sit over here, something big's gonna happen, right? They just couldn't help themselves. Right? That's what they did. So they walk up the stairs, they go into the galleries, they take the four paintings, and just like Al predicted, no one says a word to them. They take the four paintings off the walls, they walk back down the stairs unmolested, but they walk onto the mosaic. And when they get on the mosaic, there's a guard standing right about where your angle is in this photo, and he tells them to stop. And they stop, and he says, get off the mosaic. Fortunately, that slowed them down enough for him to notice they were carrying paintings with them. And he stops them again, so what do? They take the gun and they shoot him. They shoot the guy in his side. It's a serious injury, right? And I want you to put yourself there for a second. It's a cement and marble hall, cavernous. If you've ever heard a gun being fired without air protection on, it's piercing. Imagine it in that room. So everyone's panicked. People hit the floor. The guard's on the floor bleeding profusely. And they just walk out with the paintings. Fortunately for the guard, he had just then been giving directions to a nurse in the museum, and she saved his life. But the guys go over to the car, and they take the 3 smaller paintings and they put them in the back seat. Driver gets behind the wheel, and his henchman, you remember I told you why they needed a station wagon for the big painting? The henchman takes the Gauguin and puts it on the roof and holds it like this. That's a true story, right? So this is not what you see in a Tom Cruise movie or in a Pierce Brosnan movie, but that's what he did. He put the painting on the roof of the car, and they take off with a Gauguin on the roof. But for all their tomfoolery and goofy behavior, they've pulled off one of the world's biggest art heists, right? And it's the first art heist ever pulled off at gunpoint. It's a big deal. They're gone. They bring the paintings to Al, they get rid of the getaway car, and they take off. The police come and handle the scene. So these 2 thieves go to the bar they hang out at. It's a big bar in Worcester. And it's around 2:30, and the place is packed, because it's Worcester, right? So they sit down, they have a couple of drinks, and they toast each other for pulling off this major heist. But believe me, see, this is the key about art thieves. This is just one theft. They're not going to steal art again. They're going to rob a pharmacy for drugs. They're going to do a home invasion. They're going to maybe rob a bank. But they're not art thieves. They're just thieves. They're common criminals, right? Next week, they'll do something else. So they're sitting there, having a couple of drinks, and all of a sudden on the television screens in the bar, there's breaking news. Now, do you remember once upon a time if you're watching the television and it said breaking news, it meant that news was breaking? It meant something was up, right? I remember those days, like you would think a world leader has died or someone's bombing something, or so everybody in the bar pays attention to this announcement. And then they see a local anchor come on and say breaking news out of Worcester, so you can hear a pin drop in the place. And he says, Worcester Art Museum has been robbed. Rembrandt, Gauguin, Picasso stolen. A guard has been shot and rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The thieves are armed and dangerous, and they're on the loose. FBI's on the scene. Details at 6. Wow. So the whole place is murmuring. They're all talking about who could this have been, right? And the 2 thieves are regulars in this place. So what do you think they do? They see this and they go, that was us. True story. I'm not making this a nonfiction. So is anybody here, is there anybody in the room that, like me, has been doing investigations their whole career or former law enforcement or anything? I've been doing this stuff for 30 some odd years now, and I have to tell you, that's a great lead, right? When Frank can attest to this, when people confess to their community that they committed a crime, you should follow up on it, and they did. So the police did, and but still the paintings were gone. So it's not uncommon for masterpieces to be stolen, the thieves arrested, but the painting's still missing. There's a big gap between who stole them and where are they. So this is the St. Bartholomew by Rembrandt that was targeted by Al as the #1 piece that needed to be stolen. And Rembrandt painted St. Bartholomew 3 times in his career, and he's in that same pose each time. And he probably, I don't know if you can see it, but in his hand, he's holding a flaying knife. And he's holding a flaying, I went to St. Bartholomew School, a Catholic school, for 8 years, 1st grade through 8th grade. And I know the story of St. Bartholomew. I remember a nun telling us in the 1st grade, he was skinned alive at the stake. And the great artists would paint martyred saints holding or standing by or near the instrument of their martyrdom. So he's holding a flaying knife. And I have to tell you, when you're told that story at 6 years old, it sticks with you for a very long time. So 50 years later, I'm still talking about Sister Martina and the flaying knife. But I love this painting, and it's in a movie called American Hustle. Christian Bale and Bradley Cooper, and they say it's not really a Rembrandt, but it is, and you have to see it. If you haven't been to Worcester, it's worth the trip. And it has the hallmarks of a great Rembrandt painting where somehow the light comes from the subject instead of shining on him, right? And you can see it in this painting, and when you see it in person, you know you're looking at the real thing. These are the thieves here, the young guys, and I love these period photos crime photos. I love these old photos like this. Like this guy just shot a guard in the commission of a multi-million-dollar heist, and the police are fine with handcuffing him in front, you know, carrying a cigarette cavalierly into the courthouse. I love that stuff. So Al has to get rid of the paintings because the police come to his house. Everybody knows these guys work for Al Monday. The police go to his house, and he tells them they can't come in, so they have to go home and dot their I's and cross their T's. And he has to hide these paintings now. So in the movies, he would have put them behind a bookcase, and you pull the handle and the bookcase turns, right? Or a Swiss bank or something. But Al brought them to Johnston, Rhode Island, not far from where I grew up. He brought them to the Pachillo Pig Farm, which is a mob-controlled, gigantic pig farm. And it was also the EPA's first Superfund hazardous site. It was the most polluted place in the United States. And he hid these paintings in a hayloft at the pig farm, right? And as crazy as that sounds, that gives you an indication of how hard it is to find paintings, because you can put them there and leave them there. And unlike Whitey Bulger, they don't have to go get their hair cut with their girlfriend. They don't have to go to CVS for pharmacies. They don't need fresh milk, right? They just sit there waiting for someone to recover them. But they did recover them. What happened was two thieves who were awaiting sentencing on a violent home invasion and were out on bail because it's Massachusetts in the 1970s, they see this news story on the front page of the paper, and they decide, if we can get these paintings back, the judge will do us a favor. So they go to Al's house, just like the cops, but they put a gun in his chest and say, bring us to the paintings. And Al says, aye, aye. He takes them to the paintings come back, and they live happily ever after. These are the investigators who worked on the case. In the center there, you could see the Brooding Woman by Gauguin. That was on the roof of the car. In the distance, you can see the Rembrandt without its frame, because Al threw the frame in the Blackstone River. He felt like the frame was weighing him down. And then you can see the Picasso, Woman and Child, cut off there on the edge. But that's an important story. This is the guard, by the way. He's there when the painting comes back weeks later. So he survived and lived happily ever after. But this is such an important story. It's a major moment in art heist history, because he does this at gunpoint, and he thinks he can sell these, and it's the ultimate lesson you have to remember, is that there are no buyers. There's nobody who wants to buy a multi-million-dollar painting for pennies on the dollar. And you're laughing because I think you might have bought one, right? So there's no one out there who's going to say, oh, I can get this Rembrandt for only $10 million and it'll put me in prison for a number of years. They'll just go buy a real Rembrandt, right? There's no buyers. They're too valuable and too recognizable. However, 3 years later, it happens again at gunpoint. Thieves pull up. This is that museum, the second nicest museum on the Fenway. They call it the MFA, right? And you can see that circular drive there on the Fenway. That's the Fenway entrance to the MFA. And it's important because thieves pull up in a van, 4 guys, and they pull into that circular drive, and 2 get out. This is really clever because it's another daytime heist. It's May of '75. And the reason it's clever is because in the afternoon, if there's not an early Red Sox game, there's no traffic over there, and it takes you to points north, south, east, or west. You can go anywhere. So if you have 30 seconds ahead of the cops, they're probably not going to catch you. So it's a good route. And these thieves set up a car fire on the Fenway as well, just to distract police. So they pull in, and it's early afternoon. 2 guys get out. They walk into the museum. There wasn't that glass wall there. For those of you who go to the MFA, there's no glass wall at the time. They walk right up to the 2nd floor. They know exactly what they're looking for. This painting. At the time, it was called Portrait of Elsbeth Van Ryn. It was thought to be Rembrandt's sister, but it is not. It's called Girl with the Fur-Trimmed Cloak. It belonged to the family of Robert Treat Paine, and it was on loan to the MFA at the time. And it's remarkable. Few paintings have ever done this to me. This did. When I finally got to see it, I saw it in North Carolina. The thing buckles your knees. It's so great that it's often used to evaluate other Rembrandts, because this is such a great example of his work. It's on an oak panel, and it's oval, as you can see. The 2 thieves walk upstairs directly for this painting. They know what they're looking for. Two elderly guards come up to him, and they literally just shove them aside, and they pull the painting off the wall and run out the museum, back out that same entrance. They stop in that entrance inside, and they fire warning shots to scare off any heroes, right? Again, piercing, loud, scares the heck out of people. I've talked to people that were there, petrifying, right? They run down the stairs, they turn, and they fire shots at the staircase, sort of like in the movies. Don't come after us. But this guy, Monkowski, who was a former Boston cop, runs after them anyway. He ran in the direction from which the bullets were coming to save this painting, right? And if you work in a museum long enough, you feel like you need to save these things. You feel like they're family, right? You can't help yourself, and he couldn't. He runs to the van, the thieves are inside it, he grabs the Rembrandt, and there's a tug of war over a Rembrandt. And one of the thieves inside has a machine gun, and he points it at him, and the mastermind of the theft stops him, because he knows what will happen if you shoot somebody, right? And he says, don't kill him. So they just take the machine gun and they smash him in the head with the butt of the gun. He's showing his injury here. Globe photo, by the way, Frank. And he lets go, and the van takes off. And unlike Worcester, they don't make any silly mistakes. They don't make admissions in front of their community. The painting's just gone. And this is no, I mean this is no insult to the MFA, but it's not the Gardner. A painting goes missing. They have 100,000 paintings in their storage, and they put something else there. The insurance company looks for it, and life goes on, right? But there's no leads. There's no good info on this painting. There's no forensic evidence. It's 1975. And the painting's gone. There's a reward in the newspaper, in the Globe, for the, I think it was $50,000 for the painting, but that's it. A couple of years earlier, this guy here named Miles Connor, some of you might have heard of Miles. He's a person I have evaluated to be the greatest art thief who has ever lived. And in 1973, he went with some friends to Monmouth, Maine, to the home of the Woolworth family, the Woolworth estate. And they broke in, and they stole a bunch of antiques. They stole 2 Simon Willard grandfather clocks. They stole a bunch of silver, a whole bunch of things. And Miles knows you can't sell stolen art because he's done it so much in his life, but he can't resist. He steals 3 paintings by the Wyatts. And they make off with them, perfectly fine. And Miles knows, again, you can't sell them, but he tries to sell them anyway, because if he's anything, he's a risk taker. And he's also a rock and roll star. He's a big rock and roll figure on the South Shore, playing at the Beachcomber in Quincy, playing up in Revere on Revere Beach. One night before one of his shows, he makes an appointment to meet with someone who wants to buy his Wyatts. So he brings them with him. He's got a show in a couple of hours, but he meets the guy in a parking lot. And they talk about price, etc. And the guy agrees to Miles' price. So Miles shows him the painting, and the guy's name's Bernie. This is what I'm looking for. It's exactly the stuff I'm looking for. Okay, so Bernie takes out his wallet and shows Miles his FBI badge, right? Because there are no buyers for this. He's arrested. It's the FBI and the Mass State Police sting Miles arrested. They put him in the back of the car. He's been arrested for everything. He's a legendary criminal. His life story makes Whitey Bulger look like a piker, right? So he's in the back of the car, and the FBI agent says to him, let's see you get out of this one, Connor. And he says, well, just you watch me. And the state trooper says, it's going to take a Rembrandt to get you out of this. And it did. It took a Rembrandt to get him out of this. So, of course, he wasn't held. And Miles went to the MFA in 1975 with a cohort and went and stole a Rembrandt. And he used this painting to negotiate with prosecutors who he was facing state and federal charges. They all wanted him to go away for a long time. He was going to have to serve them consecutively. He got his charges, his sentences reduced to concurrent, and he served less than 8 years for his crime because he was able to negotiate with this Rembrandt. And the reason this is really significant is because this is something that happens a lot now, right? People steal art as a get-out-of-jail-free card. And always, they're stealing it first for the money. Step 2, they find out there's no buyer. Step 3 is, why give it back when, if I get in trouble down the road, I can negotiate with these paintings? And that's what happens to him. And Miles Connor set this horrible precedent forever. Another Massachusetts guy should be very proud of our legacy here. It doesn't only happen in Massachusetts. In fact, in 1962, this painting by Rembrandt, Portrait of Jacob de Gien III, was stolen from the Dulwich Picture Gallery in Great Britain. And here's another one of my favorite crime scene photos. The rubber bone thief, they call the guy. He cut a hole in this employee entrance, climbed through, and stole paintings small enough to take back out the door. And I think the guy in this photo was saying, "Hey, boss, I know how they got in." That's the likely caption for that photo. But from a security point of view, my question is, okay, you cut the hole in the door and you climb through, but why don't you just open the door on the way out? Like, why don't you just take whatever paintings and but that's what he did. And he was caught. And then the painting was stolen 3 more times, right? So it's the most often stolen painting in the world. So that's why we refer to it as the takeaway Rembrandt. It's still at the Dulwich Picture Gallery as of my last check of their website. This painting was stolen in the 1930s. It's called Saskia at Her Toilet, and it was stolen from this big castle in Great Britain. And it's a sad story because the thieves broke in, they stole 20 paintings, but the police were on the tail right away, and the thieves panicked, and they took this one painting and burned it. Okay, so this is gone forever. You're looking at the best image you'll ever see of this painting. And it's always my reminder to tell audiences that if you have a favorite painting that you haven't seen in person, you haven't seen it. You got to go in person and see these paintings that speak to you. You got to see them in person because photographs, high-res photos, they do nothing compared to the actual 3D experience, and it is a 3D experience. The bright side is that all the research I did of 82 Rembrandt heists, this is the only one that was ever destroyed. People don't destroy stolen paintings. They're too easy to hide, and they're too valuable. So that brings me to the Gardner Museum. And almost everyone in this room has seen this courtyard, but it never gets old looking at it, as you can see. And again, we have the nasturtiums up right now if you're looking for something to do. So I think you probably have heard the story before, but the accurate version is that on March 18th, as St. Patrick's Day had turned into the next day, at 1:24 in the morning, a car pulled up, not a police car, a car pulled up on Palace Road, which is the Simmons College side of the Gardner, and 2 men got out of the car and they went to the employee entrance, which is no longer there, and rang the intercom and said to the guard, Boston police were responding to a disturbance in the compound. And based on that alone, the guard let the police into the building. Now, that was against his training and against policy and protocol. I'm not giving away anything to say that if the police come to your institution and you have not called them, you make 2 phone calls. 1, to your boss. 2nd, to 911. Because if you call 911, it's a fail-safe. They're either going to say, yes, we sent him, let him in, or they're going to say, we did not send him, we're on our way, right? The guard didn't do that. He buzzed the thieves, the police officers, into the building. Once they came in, there were 2 guards on duty at the time overnight. One was upstairs doing rounds, and what that means is you're basically looking to see if there's smoke or water, right? Because fire is the ultimate villain when it comes to art. So he's walking upstairs doing his rounds. This guard's at the watch desk. 2 police officers come in. One walks up to the watch desk. The other stands off to the side by the staircase to the basement. One of the thieves does all the talking. The other never says a word. And this is absolutely typical in heists. There's always one guy taking the lead and always one guy who's the muscle and keeps his mouth shut, right? So you can imagine it would be a problem if both of them were speaking. It's one guy. And he says to the guard, yeah, we got a report of a disturbance. Are you working alone? And the guard says, no. I have another guy with me. And he says, well, get him down here. So the guard radios for his partner and says, we don't reveal their names even though they're out there, but he says, can you come down the stairs? The guard makes the walk downstairs. It takes him about 35 seconds to get there. In the interim, the police officer is saying to the kid behind the kid, he's in his early to mid-20s, and he says to him, is anything going on here tonight? Anything strange? And he said, no, not that I'm aware of. And now the second kid arrives, and he says, you know, you look familiar to me, to the one behind the desk. do I know you from somewhere? And the guard says, I don't think so. And the cop says, well, let me see your ID. So he hands him the ID, and the cop says, yeah, I knew you looked familiar to me. There's a warrant out for you. Come out from behind that desk. So the kid comes out from behind the desk. Now, the two guards are away from any communications with the outside world, right? There's a duress button that would automatically alert the police, and a phone, right? But he's away from those now. So then the police officer says, you two, you're under arrest. Assume the position. And if you remember back then, assume the position was something from TV shows, right? It meant get up against the wall. And the guards did this. And they handcuffed them. And once the handcuffs are on the guards, the police officer says, gentlemen, this is a robbery. We're not here to harm you. Don't put up a fight. We're here to take the art. Don't try to resist. And the guard says back to him, they don't pay us enough to put up a fight, right? And frankly, he's correct, right? These are security guards. They're overnight observe and report guards, right? The kid that said this was, I want to say 5'6", 140 pounds. They're not Navy SEALs, okay? They're just overnight guards. And now they're handcuffed. The thieves put duct tape around their eyes, around their faces. They take them both into the basement. Now, I can tell you the basement is a very strange place for thieves to venture down into without knowing the building, because it's dark, it seems like a labyrinth even though it's not. And the place, they bring one right to the bottom of the stairs and they handcuff him to a sink, a work sink. They take the other about 50 yards down a hall, take a right, and they put him on a ledge there. In the spot they took him, I can tell you, maybe there's 5 employees in the museum who've ever been down there. There's just no reason to go down there. It's very odd, right? Usually, guys pulling off a heist will take the guards and secure them together so you can watch them easily. And believe me, these were not 2 guys that were going to break out of these handcuffs and duct tape. But that's what they did. They go upstairs, and when they hit the 2nd floor landing in the palace, finally motion sensors go off, but they're internal only, right? Might be a surprise to you, but the motion sensor alarms don't go to the police. If they did, the police would have to respond every time a mouse runs through an old building, right? So they're going to a computer and no one's there to respond to them. Interestingly, though, when they do this, it's 1:48 in the morning. 24 minutes have elapsed before they started stealing anything. And that's one of the great mysteries of this heist. Because, again, I revert back to this monstrous database of heists I've looked at. If you made a normal curve of all of these thefts, 99% of them would be between 3 and 9 minutes. 9 minutes would be very, very long. I've spoken to more thieves than I can count, and they'll tell you 3 minutes seems like 30 minutes. You're pumped, right? Every second seems like 10 minutes. It's intense. 24 minutes without stealing anything tells you a lot about the thieves. It tells you a lot about what's going on. Finally, they go directly into the Dutch room, and what do they target immediately? All 4 of our Rembrandts. So these are the thieves. There's 2 renditions of each one of them because the guards couldn't agree on which one of them had, or if both had fake mustaches on. And I know that sounds crazy, and that the descriptions are just, look at them. There's just one guy with a narrow face, a guy with a round face. Everything else about them is average in Boston accents, right? And that's because eyewitness accounts are very unreliable, even if you're a victim of a crime, right? When you encounter somebody, when I met new people tonight before this talk, I didn't look at them saying to myself, I might have to describe them to a police composite sketch artist tomorrow morning. I just looked at them, right? So it's hard to give these descriptions. These are the descriptions of the guys, and so many of you in this room fit these drawings. It gives you an example of why it's so hard to identify. These are used for elimination. So we know the thieves were not people of color, they were not women, they were not elderly, they were not teenagers. That's about all we have to go on. This is the guard that let the thieves into the building, and I show you this picture for a couple of reasons. First, to show you the MO of the thieves. You can see how they put the duct tape around his face. They put him down in that basement I'm showing you here in the photos. You see they put duct tape around his ankles later. Secondly, if you look at him and look at his outfit, it's a reminder for me to tell you I was not the security director in 1990. Cranberry corduroys would never fly on my security team. Just wouldn't work. But that's the guard. That's the one that let them in. These are the Rembrandts that were stolen. So the thieves went directly for the first one they went to was Storm in the Sea of Galilee in the center, probably the most recognizable of all the stolen art. Very big, 5 feet by 4 feet. That one and the one to your right, Lady and Gentleman in Black, are the two big ones, right? They're both about 5 feet. Those were taken from the wall, and those were the two that were cut from their frames, the only two that were cut from their frames, okay? And they were cut from their frames because, you probably know this, but so the canvas is wrapped around a stretcher, right, before it's framed. And the stretchers for both of these are very big and very heavy. You couldn't easily carry them out in the commission of a theft, so they cut these canvases from the frames. Conversely, on the left, the self-portrait etching is very, very small. It's only 2 inches by 2 inches, right? And they took this as well. The Storm in the Sea of Galilee, I should mention, is the second most valuable stolen thing in the entire world. And it's super valuable, primarily, not just because it's Rembrandt, but primarily because it's his only known seascape. It was probably the most popular painting in the city at the time when Andy went to see it to help his friend impress a girl. It's really famous in Boston. The fourth Rembrandt they tried to steal was this self-portrait on the wall, which we still have, thankfully. They took it off the wall, they stood it up against that chest in the right-hand side photo, turned around, and when they left, the only explanation is that they forgot it. So they took 3 of our 4 Rembrandts. Again, Mrs. Gardner's collection, the hallmark of it is that she doesn't have the most Rembrandts in the city or in the country, but they're all important. So this Rembrandt self-portrait is Rembrandt painting himself just at the time he's being discovered. Nevertheless, in his hometown, he paints himself as a great master, wearing the garb of a great master artist. I mentioned that the Storm in the Sea of Galilee is the second most valuable stolen thing in the world. Does anybody know what this is? Right, it's the Vermeer, the concert. This is by far the most valuable thing probably that has ever been stolen. People think about the Mona Lisa, but the Mona Lisa became famous because it was stolen. Concert by Vermeer, you could literally name almost any hundreds of millions of dollar price, and it's conceivable that this would be worth it. It's the only missing Vermeer. It's a big deal, obviously, that we have this Vermeer exhibition going on at the Rijksmuseum, 28 of his 36 works, but this one isn't included, of course, because it's missing. It's the only missing one. And it's just worth whatever price tag you want to say, but it was not cut from its frame. It was removed from the frame on its stretcher and stolen intact. And these are the rest of the works that were taken. Along the top are the works by Degas, the least 5 valuable of our Degas works. So we have 8. If you want to put a price tag on it, and you're really not supposed to in the art world, but from a crime perspective, these are the 5 least valuable of our Degas works. The bottom right-hand corner is a painting by Govert Flinck, a student of Rembrandt's. Mrs. Gardner purchased it believing it was a Rembrandt, and it wasn't until around 1980 that the Rembrandt Research Project determined that it was by his student Flinck, but its dollar value remained about the same because it's such a great painting. In the center is a small painting by Edward Manet called Chez Tortoni. And this one really stands out to me because most people wouldn't recognize it. No one ever really talks about it. But I can tell you, if this was the only thing stolen that night, if it was the only one, I'd probably be here talking to you tonight about the Great Gardner Heist because it's that valuable, right? This is a really important painting, and it's amongst these other important paintings that makes it an afterthought, and that's unfortunate. And then these 2 odd pieces on the bottom, this Chinese beaker called a gu on the left, it's the oldest piece of the museum from 1200 BC, and to its right is a Napoleonic finial that flew atop his flag for the 1st Regiment. So those are the 13 pieces that are missing. That's a photo of the crime scene the next morning. So in the foreground, you see that big frame on the floor, and you see inside it there's a redwood frame also. That's the stretcher that the Storm in the Sea of Galilee was on. The frame holding the Flinck is laying atop of it. In the middle there is the frame that held the concert by Vermeer, and you can see other frames in the background as well. This is what it looks like when a painting is cut from its frame. So this is the one part of Lady and Gentleman in Black that I can show you. where it's cut out. So you can see that white wood is the stretcher that the canvas was wrapped around. The frame is still there, of course. And those ribbons are from a supporting canvas. So because these were well-maintained paintings, they had extra canvas relined onto the back. So the actual painting, it's a very neat cut. People picture these jagged edges and stuff. That's not the case. Now, the two big paintings, for some reason, people always assume they were rolled up and put into tubes, which is highly unlikely. I'm certain that they were not rolled up. These paintings were thick. If you started to roll them, it would be like rolling cardboard, and we would have seen a lot of paint chips on the floor, lots of them. The person who mentored me in this crazy world I inhabit now recovered a painting that had been rolled, and there was large flaked paint chips. This is one of the chips that was recovered from our paintings. So you can see it's in a little prescription pill capsule inside a small vial. It's just a little fragment, and that's from the cutting. So we don't believe that they were rolled. I should go back to here. So lots of different leads have come up over the years. There have been books and documentaries, podcasts. I didn't watch the recent documentary that was on Netflix. I just had it with these shows because they're so inaccurate. And nevertheless, people come up to me all the time and say, hey, I saw the documentary. Why didn't the FBI blah, blah, blah? And it's always wrong that these shows and these books and podcasts get it wrong. It's not their fault. They're trying their best. But in reality, I work on this case alongside the same FBI agent for 17 years. And we have a case file together. And the case file's somewhere between 60 and 70,000 pages, right? And these people who work on these projects have no access to it, so how could they know? So much of it is just, and Carol, you know who the other person working on the case is, but I teach an art crime course at the Harvard Extension with this FBI agent, so we live this thing every day and every night. So we still have suspects that we believe are involved that we haven't revealed to the public. In 2013, we stated that we believe we know who the thieves were, but we're not releasing their names. We believe we know the art may have been trafficked, or I should say, brought to Philadelphia and offered for sale, but not necessarily sold. We've made a lot of progress in this investigation. I mean that, or I would have quit a long time ago. Problem is, if you follow football, it's like getting down to the red zone, right? When you get that close to the end zone, that's when it really gets hard, right? And an investigation into stolen art is so much different than any other sort of investigation, except for a kidnapping. So if it's a homicide, you investigate the case, you consider all the evidence, and you charge somebody, and you give it to a prosecutor, and the jury decides, right? So you do all that in an art theft investigation, but until you have the paintings back, you failed. It's not over, right? So it doesn't matter how much we know. All that matters is today, where are the paintings? And that's all we work on. I mean, when I say 7 days a week, even during the campaign season, nonstop looking for these stolen paintings. And because of all of this work, and because we have a $10 million reward, the largest private reward ever offered, I believe that these things will come together, and one day these paintings will be back in their frames. The only place in the world that they can hang is at the Gardner Museum because of Mrs. Gardner's will. They'll be back in those frames, and that's why we have the frames still up on the walls. The last part I want to tell you is about the future of art theft investigation. This was a Rembrandt drawing that was stolen, and it was called The Judgment. And unlike his other works, it's not highly recognizable, and it's not highly valuable. I think it was valued at about $250,000. And for that reason, when it was stolen from an art exhibition, it was really vulnerable. But the LA County Sheriff's Office, which had the lead on this case, did something really smart. They blasted it throughout social media, and it became highly recognizable. So they overcame that. And then I was on with the LA media, and I kept saying the same message to the thieves. If you have this picture, you've not stolen a picture, you've stolen a problem. You're never going to be able to sell it. Everybody knows what it is. Leave it somewhere and call the authorities and just hope this whole thing goes away. You've made a big mistake. And on the third day after the heist, they did that. They left it at a church, and it was recovered. And this is the LA County Sheriff's Department getting it back. And the reason I tell you that story is because it's almost like an Amber Alert, right? It has to be the perfect scenario. You can't do it every time. But in certain perfect scenarios, social media and the media writ large can be a big asset in the early days, especially, of recovering art. Did I mention before my book's available on Amazon? So I want to thank you very, very much for having me tonight. It's really a pleasure for me to come to the Harvard Club. I wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for Jan. So Jan, thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope I gave you a good overview of how art heists happen, how you have to be careful if you have art here in Massachusetts. If you have art in your home, my one tip for you is keep track of what contractors you allow in your house. If you have a contractor in your home, write down their name and when they were there. That's your right to know who they are. Because when we hear about art being stolen from private homes, which is the #1 location from which art is stolen, the first place we turn to as investigators is, have you had contractors in your home? And a lot of times, that's the case. So that's my free tip for you, free consulting for the evening. If you have any questions, I think we're going to take a few questions.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions, but first, Anthony, thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
So we do have time for a couple of questions. Staff has some microphones. Why don't we start? We'll start in the aisle to make it easier for Darius as he gets around with the microphones. If you can just wait for the mic. Come. No, you do for everyone else in the room.
You showed a picture of the eagle that was on top of, I don't know if it's a flagpole or whatever. I've seen the TV shows and the podcasts, whatever. I don't know if any of this is true based on what you said, but within a week after the heist, this eagle appeared. A, is that true? And B, if it is true, the person who brought it in must know what happened. What's the story about the eagle and the person who brought it back?
What you're referring to is there's a person who is a jeweler in Washington Street in Boston who alleges that in April of 1990, a person of interest in our heist brought in a finial and asked him how much he thought it was worth. I will say that we've had lots and lots of people tell us over the years that they've seen our works, and they're telling the truth. The problem is, was it really one of our works? So oftentimes someone will come forward and they're telling the truth. I saw the storm in the Sea of Galilee, and I can think of one instance off the top of my head. We got in the car and we drove to Pennsylvania based on that. And we went exactly to the location the guy said it was, and the painting looked so much like the storm in the Sea of Galilee. He really thought he saw it. So unless you see it yourself, you have to, say, well, he could have seen the finial. It's possible. That's not the Napoleonic finial is not unique. There's a number of them. That one was from the 1st Regiment. If you go online tonight and Google them, you'll see a number of them with different numbers on them. And there's a lot of finials out there, right? An eagle for the top of a flag. So it just goes into the collective wisdom that we've accumulated in the heist as part of a story, but all we can say is possibly. Possibly, that's it. That's all we can say.
Okay, thank you. Great talk, thank you. My question is about Robert Guaranti and Robert Gentile. So the first, actually 2 questions. First question is, Robert Guaranti's wife claimed that her husband gave Robert Gentile 2 of the paintings in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant, I guess. My first question is, what were the 2 paintings? Did she ever disclose that to the FBI, and is that something you can tell us? That's the first question. And then the second question is, supposedly those paintings were brought to Manchester, Connecticut. They're allegedly buried behind a storage shed, underneath a storage shed. And Robert Gentile's son later said that his father was upset because there was some water leakage or damage, and he was very upset about whatever was buried in there. So the second question is, do you believe that those 2 paintings that were allegedly transferred from Robert Guaranti to Robert Gentile were damaged or destroyed before the FBI searched his property in Manchester, Connecticut?
Okay. So the first part of that about speaking to Robert Guarante's widow, that was me who spoke to her. And I can tell you, she was telling me the truth. And there's one of the Gardner theft books says that she conned me into going there that day. She had no idea I was going to be there. It was a complete surprise. I wasn't even supposed to. At the last second, I said, with Jeff, the FBI agent, we said, let's just go by. God, we didn't even plan to go. She was telling me the truth, but again, her truth is her truth, right? But she might not be correct about what she saw. She saw paintings, right? But she was telling us the truth. She described the paintings somewhat, and just for the record, I'm able to talk about these two, this incident, because it was disclosed in open court by the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut when Robert Gentile was being prosecuted, because I never talk about details like this, but these are public record now. Yeah, so it is falsely claimed in a book called Master Thieves that she tricked us into coming. It was absurdity. We do believe Robert Guarente gave Robert Gentile 2 paintings. Whether they were our paintings, I don't know. She said, based on the sizes of what she told us, is my microphone okay? It's going on. Okay. That takes us to the second part about being buried under the shed. That story about that container underneath the shed being filled with water and his father being upset. Robert Gentile messing around with the reporter he talked to. Robert Gentile loved lying to people. I know for a fact that he made this story up just to mess with he was on television one night talking about how he used to land F-16 fighter jets on aircraft carriers in Vietnam. He was never there. I mean, it's just, he loved this, right? The container I had in my office for about 3 or 4 years could never fit these paintings. The most that could have been in this container would have been like the finial, maybe the small Degas works. It was never flooded. It was an airtight container. But I will say that I was there when we found it. It was hidden underneath the shed under a trap door. And when we pulled it out, I was very excited, but it was empty. But next to the container, there were homemade silencers. Is my battery dying, or anyway? There were homemade silencers and explosives. In the house, we found guns and drugs and money, other stolen items. So it begs the question, what was so important that it was in that waterproof Rubbermaid container? But it wasn't these paintings. The container was not flooded. This is the sort of stuff we deal with all the time, though. You take these little lies and they become lore through books and documentaries.
We have time for just 1 or 2 more questions.
I can maybe. Does this work?
1 and a 2.
Does it work?
Yep,
Okay.
you're on.
So thank you so much. So I have to advertise your book because I absolutely loved it. There's one sentence where you say that Rembrandt doesn't give his secrets so easily. So I guess that applies both to.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to advertise your book because I absolutely loved it.
Thanks.
There's one sentence where you say that Rembrandt doesn't give its secrets so easily, whether that's for like heist or for
Right.
the art itself. But linked with that, I have a question where probably there's no answer. You said that you made this huge database about different thieves and how there are different profiles. So I'm just wondering, when you look at 81 stolen art from Rembrandt, is there a pattern in the art that is repeatedly stolen? So I don't know if that's
A pattern.
like a pattern within the art, images. A lot of them are mostly portraits, but is there something special in the images, or is it just
No.
random? Like, because
No.
it's not the price, it's not the size, it's like, it kind of varies. So I'm just wondering if there is a pattern.
No, thieves steal what they think is the most valuable. Simple as that. They could not care less what the picture looks like. I spent a lot of time, this isn't Rembrandt, but I spent a lot of time with the thief in the Netherlands who stole 2 Van Goghs from the Van Gogh Museum. Could not care less about Van Gogh. In fact, one of the paintings that was stolen was the first landscape, it was a seascape Van Gogh painted, and he painted it at the ocean. And it was a windstorm that day, and famously this painting has specks of the beach sand in the painting. And I sat down, the guy's name is
Octave Durham. It's like such a perfect name for an art thief, right? Octave Durham. And I said, what was it like? I always ask the thieves, what's it like when it's you and that painting alone and you're in your home and you're just looking at this thing that's worth $100 million and it's by Van Gogh? And he said, I didn't care. He said, all I knew was someone said there was beach sand in it, so I licked it to see if I could taste it, right? That's a person who steals art. They couldn't care less what the painting is. They couldn't care, there's no, I wanted this one because it had, the Madonna in it, or whatever. It's strictly money.
I'm sorry, microphone? Okay.
Sorry. It's just like my question is like when you think about Rembrandt, like he was so good at picturing like small details of the emotions. So like what I'm thinking, even somebody who's not educated in art might appreciate it because it's so good in terms of.
I wish, and that I mean this. I'm not saying this sarcastically. That's great for a novel, right? But in reality, all the thief cares about is that the label says Rembrandt. Bingo, right? And they're probably like, there's a D in Rembrandt? Whatever, all right, I'll steal this anyway. And that's it. They could not care less, oh, this is very beautiful, because they're not going to keep it. They want to sell it. And that's all. Sometimes it's a matter of how big it is. Can I get it through the hole that we came in? But it's not about the image, unfortunately. It's great for movies, though.
So, last question.
Firstly, thank you for a great presentation.
Thanks.
Maybe you could speak a little bit to the process and how jurisdiction is determined for Homeland Security getting involved. And I just read yesterday that the most expensive coin was returned to Greece, the Idmar, and Homeland Security was involved in that, bringing it back. Could you speak a little bit to how that happened? Sure.
Basically, the FBI responds to like the crime itself, right? So it's very complicated involving the laws and what constitutes a museum, what constitutes a piece of art that can be, that should be investigated by the FBI. Homeland Security gets involved when it has to do with crossing borders and maybe captured at an airport, that sort of thing. So FBI is the lead agency when it comes to art theft. Homeland Security will get involved in some sort of smuggling or looting, things that are shipped, that sort of thing. But it's FBI primarily. That's interesting that you mentioned coins because the gold coin that was recovered. Two things. Tom Mashberg wrote the story for the New York Times about that. Secondly, my next book is going to be about the biggest theft of coins, rare coins in history. You can guess what state it took place in, right? Massachusetts. But this audience will be interested in knowing that they were taken from the fog in 1973. By far the biggest theft of gold coins from the fog. So jurisdiction is FBI, and to wrap it up, there's something I was thinking of today when I was talking about my background. I don't mean this as a political statement in any way, it's a public policy comment, but I've been doing security for 32 or 33 years, and protecting this and protecting that, and billions of dollars poured into programs I've worked in, countless billions, and we do nothing to protect schools. And like I think about this in terms of myself, I spend the last 17 years of my life protecting paintings, which are incredibly important. I'm very proud of it. And before that, airplane passengers, right? But we do nothing. It's not a comment on guns at all, I swear to you. It's just like, but we take our most precious thing that we have and we put them in these buildings and we don't secure them at all. And it's just has been on my mind for the last couple of days, obviously, with the Nashville thing. But it just gives you pause when you think about theft and what people are interested in. If I was given a talk tonight at the Harvard Club about school security, there would be, and I'm not pointing fingers at you because it'd be the same for me, there'd be a smattering of people here. I have a friend who just retired from the Boston Police who's an expert on school security, and he thought, when I retire, maybe I'll do some consulting on that. There's no business. Nobody wants to hear it. And the technology is out there. Remember me telling you this. There's artificial intelligence cameras that can identify a person carrying a gun from a great distance before they get into a building and that sort of thing. and I'll stop now because I'm preaching, but I just want to give you that perspective. You know, we talk so much about protecting precious items, but we don't spend enough protecting precious people, and forgive me for that.
Not at all.
On that. Thanks.
So,
Thanks, Andy.
so what I will say is, on one hand, what you just heard over the last hour was the talk about crime, the talk about just kind of extraordinary things that we've seen in our state, in our community. But what I have liked so much about hearing Anthony speak is really what I love about it is he dispenses hope. And somebody who has gone to work every day for the last 17 years, firm in his hope and conviction that he's going to solve the unsolvable and that we're going to see these things again. And it's our privilege to have you here tonight, and it's our privilege to have you working for that. You're working on that task for the
Thank you, Andy.
Anthony, thank
Very
you.
kind. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I really appreciate it.
So, thank you all for joining us this evening. Please, if you have time, stick around for a drink in Veritas. We'd love to see you more. Thank you for coming for our events, and travel home safe.